which sprang up on ground disturbed by fire. And he wanted to be ready for them if they did.
Shouldn't y'all be in town? You look like town dogs. Ready?
The story started in the early 20th century, and the scene showed a quiet man who worked as a woodcutter named Robert Grenier. It was said that during his childhood, he grew up in an orphanage without ever knowing who his parents were. Then, at the age of 7, he traveled alone to Idaho and worked by tidying up items in a grocery store. As a young man, Robert dropped out of school and spent his early years without any direction or purpose, and this was because he felt that nothing in the world was interesting to him, until he finally met a woman named Gladys Olding. Gladys changed Robert's life in a way he never expected. Robert, who previously did not care about anything, suddenly started going to church regularly because she was always there. Then, in short, within 3 months, their relationship became very close, until one day, Robert gathered the courage to propose to Gladys. Fortunately, Gladys accepted his proposal with a smile, and that made his life feel much more meaningful.
Open the door. Come on.
Okay.
Look at this place.
Because of this, he also realized that one of the goals of human life was to have a family. After the wedding, Robert and Gladys chose to build a wooden cabin in the deep forest on the edge of the Moyi River to begin their small life, which was full of peace. However, during that time, Robert's job often forced him to be far away from home. Then, during the summer of 1917, he joined a large project as a laborer for the construction of a railroad bridge. One day, while the men were working, a group of white workers suddenly showed up at the construction site and captured a Chinese laborer named Fu Sheng. For no clear reason, they suddenly threw the Chinese man into a deep canyon. At that moment, Robert and the others could only stand there in silence as they watched their co-worker being tossed away without any explanation. A few months after the bridge was finished, the project leader tested the new tracks. The train soon passed through smoothly, which made all the workers cheer with joy. But Robert did not feel the same way, because the image of Fu Sheng still haunted his mind. It felt as if the man was demanding an answer as to why he did not help him. Since his work was done, Robert finally went back to his cabin, and Gladys immediately welcomed her husband home. They then shared a warm hug to release the longing they had felt for so long. Robert then gave all the money from his hard work to Gladys, and she felt very thankful to have a husband as good as him. As time passed, their small life became even happier because they were blessed with a daughter they named Kate. However, behind this happiness, Robert was still constantly haunted by the memory of Fu Sheng's death and dreams of being hit by a train. Long story short, the logging season returned, and Robert had to leave again to gain money to provide for his family. This time, the logging expedition was filled with wandering men, and most of them had no homes or families. As the work was going on, they moved from one forest to another to follow the projects, and during that time, Robert remembered his co-workers one by one, including an old man who preferred to sit on a tree stump rather than sleeping in a tent. There was also Frank, a man who talked about the Bible very clearly as if he had been there when it was written. One day, while the woodcutters were resting, a black man suddenly appeared, and he was looking for someone from Mexico. As soon as he heard that name, Frank suddenly panicked and ran away in fear. Because of that, the man suddenly shot him immediately. After that, the black man explained that Frank had killed his brother just because of the color of his skin. He also told the group that if anyone disagreed with what he did, they could settle it right then, because he did not want to live his life feeling worried about revenge. However, not a single person spoke up, so the man eventually left. Among the woodcutters, there was an old man named Arn Peoples who liked to ramble about everything. He often gave advice and told random stories that did not have a clear point, even though no one really listened to him. Then, one day, Arn was in charge of setting explosives to knock down a massive tree. So, with great confidence, he told everyone to cover their ears, but when he pressed the trigger, nothing happened, which made everyone laugh. Fortunately, after he fixed his tools, the very next day, the explosion finally happened.
Would you try to cut him down?
Everyone then clapped and praised him for his success. That night, Arn started rambling and singing again as he pleased. Of course, the noise annoyed the workers in the tents, but Robert did not mind the sound at all. To him, The old man's chatter felt like entertainment in the middle of the silent forest. At that moment during one of his stories, Arn said that many evil people in this world live comfortably while good people suffer. Those words stuck in Robert's head along with the image of Fu Sheng, which still haunted him. Month after month passed, and the workers moved deeper and deeper into the woods, and that was thanks to the fact that World War I broke out. While the war was happening, the global need for wood seemed endless. Because of this, the mountain slopes eventually became bald, since almost every tree had been chopped down. Being a woodcutter was a risky job, and no matter how well a woodcutter guessed the direction a tree would fall, luck did not always stay on his side. It was proven when, one day, a terrible accident happened while chopping a big tree. Because of that incident, 3 workers died instantly. The other men then held a funeral to respect their fallen colleague and marked the victims' graves by simply nailing their boots to a tree as a humble sign that those people had once lived. Time passed until Robert finally returned home. His face brightened immediately when he saw that his little daughter could now name objects one by one. He did not know exactly how long he had been working in the forest, but it was clear that Kate was much bigger than the last time he had seen her. At that moment, regret suddenly filled his heart because he felt he had missed his beloved daughter's growth.
Oh, look, there's one.
Chicken! Chicken!
I feel it too. It's all going by so fast.
One night, Gladys shared her plan with Robert to work alongside him as a woodcutter so that their small family would not always be separated. However, Robert immediately refused because the conditions in the woods were too dangerous. Then, since he could not bear to be away from his family for too long, he finally looked for another job that was closer to home. He eventually worked for his friend, an Indian man named Jack, but over time, tragedy struck as the entire country's economy struggled after the war, and Robert's small family felt the pressure of these hard times. One day, Gladys suggested that they start farming and build a sawmill in their own yard so Robert could stay home most of the time. Upon hearing that, Robert immediately liked his wife's idea very much. Unfortunately, starting a sawmill required a lot of money, so he decided to go back to logging one last time to save up the cash they needed. Then, the very next morning, he set out once again to earn the money his family needed. Tree after tree fell as the woodcutters worked hard for the company, which paid them $4 a day, which, at that time, such a wage was quite large, so he worked with great enthusiasm. Then, while he was there, he unexpectedly met Arn again, and the old man was still the same as before. He still spent his time rambling about many different things. However, a terrible accident happened the next day while everyone was working. A heavy branch suddenly fell from above and struck Arn directly. This tragedy caused the old man to lose his memory and made him very fragile. However, as the one who knew him, Robert still sat beside him from time to time to listen to his confusing stories, which now no longer made sense. Unfortunately, a few weeks later, the old man eventually passed away, and this made Robert very sad because he had started to like him like his own father. After he saved enough money, Robert finally took a train to go home. But when he arrived at the station, everyone on the train became frantic because it turned out that a massive forest fire was burning through the area. In the middle of the panic, Robert, who was worried sick about his family, bravely ran into the woods toward his cabin to check on them, but unfortunately, the thick smoke made it hard for him to breathe, and he eventually fainted on his way. The next morning, Robert woke up only to face a bitter reality because the cabin where his family lived had been burned down to ashes. Both Gladys and his little daughter, Kate, were gone. He didn't want to believe that they died during the incident because he could not find their bodies or any bones in the ruins, but he did not know if they were dead or alive. So, for 2 full weeks, he searched every nearby town, hoping to find a trace of them, but sadly, he found nothing at all. Even so, he did not give up. One day, Robert stopped at Jack's shop to buy supplies before returning to his land. Then, when he arrived at the ruins of his cabin, he decided to wait there just in case his wife and child came back. The sadness clearly hurt his heart deeply because every breath he took was filled with memories of his family, and all that happiness they once shared had now turned into nothing but shadows. The next day, Jack arrived to bring some food for Robert. Upon seeing his friend's condition, he felt deeply saddened. Then, because he wanted to cheer his friend up, he invited him to go deer hunting. However, when Robert saw the forest he used to explore with Gladys, he could not hold back his tears and cried. As the days passed, Robert started building a small shelter on his land and lived there throughout the summer. Then, one afternoon, a mother dog and her puppies came to his shack. Robert welcomed them and played with them. He also talked to the animals as if they understood his words. Fortunately, their presence helped heal his sadness just a little bit. After that, Robert began building a proper new cabin with the help of Jack, who was very kind to him. However, he could not bring himself to rebuild the bedroom because it held too many painful memories. A few weeks later, the cabin was finally finished, and Jack went home. It was clear that the new cabin Robert had just finished looked just like the old one, but it felt completely different because his wife and daughter were not there anymore. Many years went by, but Robert continued to wait and hope for his family's return. Then, after several years of waiting, he eventually went back to the logging business. Unfortunately, he felt uncomfortable there because new technology had changed the work, and he couldn't keep up. At the same time, most of the new workers were young and rude. In the end, he chose to quit that job and return home for good. After returning home, Robert decided to buy a horse and a wagon that cost $300 from an acquaintance. Then, after he got the wagon, he began carrying passengers for money, and because of this job, he was forced to interact with people more often. It looked as if he had gotten over his trauma, but in reality, it only made him feel lonelier. One day, Robert carried a passenger named Claire Thompson. During their trip, from their short talk they shared, Robert learned that she used to be a nurse in Europe during the war, but now she was hired by the newly formed United States Forest Service, which was an agency tasked with managing logging and preventing forest fires so that tragedies like the one in the past would never happen again. That night, Robert had a dream where he saw that his wife had finally come home. Of course, he felt very happy in the dream, but suddenly, their cabin caught fire. Seeing the fire, Gladys quickly grabbed Kate and tried to escape the flames, but unfortunately, there was no way out. When Robert woke up the next morning, he found that the winter season had arrived. During those cold months, he often spent his days walking through the woods because it helped ease his loneliness. Then, after the winter passed, Robert accidentally met Claire again while she was doing a survey in the forest. They then talked for a while, and he eventually told her about the forest fire some time ago, and that he was away from home when the big fire happened. Because of this, he still did not know the fate of his wife and daughter. He did not know if they were dead or still alive somewhere. He then told her that he felt deep regret because he should have been home when the fire started, because if he had been there, he might not have lost his family. Upon hearing his story, Claire felt very sorry for him and tried to encourage him with kind words. Later that night, Robert heard footsteps outside his cabin, so he went out to check who was there. There, he found Kate, who was now a teenager, lying on the ground with injuries. In a state of total panic, he immediately carried his daughter inside and tended to her wounds. After that, he let her sleep so she could recover. That night, Robert felt so happy as he remembered the times when his small family was still together while looking at his daughter. However, when he woke up the next morning, he panicked because Kate was gone. He was confused, as the meeting had felt so real that he did not know if it was a dream or reality. Because of that, from that day on, he spent his time searching through the woods and fields in the hope of finding Kate again, and even though he never found his daughter again, he still waited at his cabin for the rest of his life, just in case she truly returned. Many years passed, and the world had changed so much, while Robert grew older and weaker. He eventually took the Great Northern Train to the city of Spokane and walked aimlessly through a city that looked completely different now. There, he saw things he had never imagined before, such as a television showing an astronaut landing on the moon. One night in a theater building, Robert looked at himself in a mirror for the first time in 10 years, and in that moment, he realized that time had truly worn him down. The next day, someone suddenly offered Robert a chance to see the beauty of the world from high above for only $4, and Robert accepted the offer. After that, Robert flew in an airplane for the first time in his life. Then, as the plane circled in the air, the sights of the scenery, people, and places from his entire life flashed through his mind, and during that flight, he finally felt connected to a world that had previously felt far away from him. He began to understand that his life had meaning, even though it was quiet and filled with loss. After that moment of peace, Robert returned to his cabin and continued his simple life while waiting for the possibility of his family returning home. In the end, Robert died in his cabin in 1968 at the age of 80. Throughout his entire life, he still did not know who his parents were. He also never discovered the truth about his wife and daughter, whether they were actually dead or still alive somewhere. The story of Robert showed us that life can be very quiet and filled with sudden loss, yet it still holds deep value. Through his journey, we see that a person's strength is often found in their ability to keep going, even when they are alone. Because of the fire, he lost everything he loved, but he did not let his heart turn bitter, and instead, he chose to stay connected to his memories and the land he called home. At the same time, his life reminds us that the world is always changing. Robert started his journey as a simple laborer in a wild forest, but he lived long enough to see a man land on the moon. This tells us that even if we feel left behind by time, we are still a part of the bigger picture. Fortunately, he found peace at the end of his life by realizing that his quiet existence had a purpose. Consequently, the moral is that love and memory are powerful enough to sustain a soul through a lifetime of solitude.
These strange dreams follow through his life, through lonely days and endless nights. A quiet man beneath the sky, watching the whole world rushing by. Every rail beneath his feet carries stories bittersweet, and time keeps flowing like the streams, leaving him with train dreams.